everybody, and welcome to this week's Control+M Presents, our bi-weekly sharing of knowledge of Plex Online. We're going to be recording this session, so I will be muting everyone. When we open the floor to questions, you can unmute yourself to join in on the questions. Today, our Jenn Berry will be doing a deep dive on the most frequently used available options with part operations. Jenn's been a Plex user since 2012 and has been a really active member of the Plex community in general, and especially the FBUG, the Plex Food and Bev user group. We're so delighted to have her aboard, and I'm sure you'll agree she has got a lot to offer everyone in the community. So take it away, Jenn. Thanks.
Thank you, Patty. Good morning, everyone. Today's presentation will be recorded and added to our YouTube channel along with all of our previous presentations. This should be uploaded by the end of the day. Patty will be sharing this presentation with me, so I will be tagging her in for some of the session. Today we will discuss operation types, operations, part op types, and how they create your process routing steps. These operation setups will be the same for both UX and Classic. Through the presentation, you may see some flags that will not be discussed. If something piques your interest, please reach out to us offline and we can dig into them with you. We chose a few of the more meaningful flags from each source to talk about today for you to consider when setting up or optimizing your processes. The operation type and part op type are both accessed through setup tables. The operation setup is accessed through a Plex screen. These three sources will need to be set up before you can add a functional process routing to a part. The operation type is linked directly to your operation, which is then pulled into your part's process routing along with the part op type. These three sources will define the steps you take in your production or receiving processes. The sources we will discuss today will show how you can separate your specific processes each step of the way. Since the op type will need to be linked to your operation, I thought we should start off with those first, then we'll discuss operations and then part op types. Operation types are assigned via setup table. These will define your specific operation or step in your parts process. They are linked to your operation, and the best practice is to set these up first. Our first op type flag will be material. This is used for any step in your process that you want to show on MRP to drive demand. This would be for raw materials. You would use this flag at your receiving operation. Be aware that if you have more than one operation on your part routing that is flagged as material, that your MRP may duplicate demand. Again, best practice is to only have one step flagged with material. If you do see double demand in MRP, you can check the MRP diagnostics report. It has an exception report for multiple flag operations. Subcontract. This flag is used for operations done outside of your facility. You will be using the send to subcontract and receive from subcontract screens for this type of operation. This will allow for the transfer of inventory between your facility and your subcontractors. It will also capture your subcontractor's cost on the returned product. Label format. This will default the label you want to have printed at each step of your process. This could be a rework label, subcontract label, WIP label, whatever you wish to have printed when each step is completed. Schedule. This flag is required to be checked for any step that will be scheduled on the dispatch list. If this is not checked, then you will not be able to schedule a job for that operation. This is not required for receiving, maintenance, or quality processes unless you want them scheduled. And just a little tidbit for you, you can schedule PMs using this flag with the proper setup. Simplified production. The simplified production flag will enable a simple control panel screen. This will start production, record production, and complete production all in one click. You can produce multiple containers at one time, such as 15 containers at 10 pounds each. This would then shoot out 15 serial numbers with their respective labels. I have a screenshot here of what the control panel would look like for entering how many containers and quantity per container. Since the next flag, pack to boxes, has some cost impact, I will turn this over to Patty, who can explain what happens when you turn this flag on. Patty?
Thanks, Jen. The pack container to boxes is a lot like the simplified production screen that Jen just showed you, the screen before this, but it does not have bomb depletion. You can pack one big container into many small ones, and then you can automatically load those smaller boxes right onto a shipper. So imagine, for example, if you have a big Gaylord of 1 million washers and you want to dump that into an automatic packaging machine to pack up 100 boxes of 10,000 washers each, and a box fills up maybe every 2 minutes. And you want shipping labels printed on those boxes. Well, if you had to do that in Control Panel, that would take you more time to record the actual transactions than it would take to do them. And you might have to relabel everything with the right shipping labels. So the pack container to boxes screen makes this really easy in one place. Jen's showing a picture of it in UX, but it works the exact same way in Classic. So in this example, we've got 135 source pieces, and we're making 9 boxes of 15 each. We're defining our gallon jug. What's not on here is pack to shipper, but that can be configured as well. Just remember that there's no time tracking on this, so if you're using actual costing, there would be no labor or overhead added to this step. And that would be the same for capacity planning or operations efficiency numbers. There's no time tracking. If you wanted to put a cost in there for standard, you could certainly associate a work center and put your setup time and your pieces per hour. Justina is going to go through this really cool module in greater detail in our next session. So if you want to know more about it, make sure you sign up. Back to you, Jen.
Thank you. So once you have defined all of your operation types, you are now able to assign them to your operations. Operations are set up via the operations screen in Plex. They're not a setup table. Operations will be your actual steps in your process, whether you have multiple steps in receiving, production, subcontracting, whatever your process is. Each step is going to be defined here. You may also have multiple operations for each operation type. For instance, for your receiving processes, you may have multiple receiving operations based on the inventory unit of measure. You may have receive in pounds, receive in gallons, or receive in feet. The nomenclature can be assigned as per your company's own verbiage or processes. So for instance, I may have an operation that I call production, but you may want to call it manufacturing or assembly instead. It all depends on what your company prefers. Interplant transfer allow. If your company has multiple PCNs and you transfer product between them, this is the flag you will want to enable. This is not used for inter-building transfers. Job quantity defective increase. What happens when you enable this flag is that if during production you have a container that is flagged as defective, it will increase your job by that defective quantity. For example, job 1 is to produce 100 cases. You have produced a container of 10 that is proven defective, at the time production is entered. Your job will automatically be increased to 110 cases to make up for the defective container of 10. In order for this to work and drive demand for the extra job quantity, you will need to also enable the flag transfer weight from source at your operation. Variable BOM. This uses the batch processing control panel view. This flag will allow you to input your BOM component quantities instead of auto-depleting them. You will need to enter in your min and maxes on your BOM setup for these parts. Your inputs at the control panel will need to be within those ranges. I have an example of what the batch process screen will look like with the variable BOM flagged. You can see that it's quite different from simplified and standard production screens. You'll need to enter each component's actual quantity used. This screen will also show your min, maxes, and standards for each component. If you go outside of those limits, you will be flagged that you're out of range.
Thanks, Jen. Before we hit the next set of flags, I just want to point out to everyone on the call that for standard costing, the quantity that's in the standard column on Jen's picture here is what's going to be used for bill of material components on your part cost structure. And anything reported outside that standard value, so within your min and max but not equal to standard, will throw a manufacturing variance in the standard cost activity report. But that makes sense because it is a variance. In actual costing, what you actually used will be booked to the container value. And just a quick word of warning, you may have some struggles if your standard quantity is 0. There are some source loading challenges that take a bit of maneuvering to work through. So if you're struggling with variable BOMs where your standard quantity is 0, why don't you reach out directly to us because we can help, but it's a little bit too deep to dive into during this session. Jen, let's move on to the fabrication flag. The fabrication flag allows you to use a pretty cool module called Pick and Fabricate, and it lets you run a kitting type process. Not everyone uses this screen, but if you do any kitting at all, either at your first or your last operation of your parts, this is a great little tool. It's a different screen than control panel that lets you consume BOM items to create a different part, but again, it doesn't track time. Here's an example. Let's say that your manufacturing process for part A is op 10 kit, op 20 assemble, op 30 pack. And in reality, you have somebody put all of the required components into a tote and hand the tote to the operator to assemble when you perform the operation 10 kit. Well, now you can run your kit operation through Pick and Fab, pick all those components by serial number and report it in this very easy Pick and Fab screen. This is available in both Classic and UX. Now, once you do this, your component inventory ceases to exist, and the inventory on that tote has a single serial number, and it will show Part A at Operation 10 Kit. Again, there's no time recorded, so in actual cost environments, you won't see a record for labor or overhead. But again, in standard, you could drive labor and overhead in a part cost structure if you want to, simply by associating a work center and putting rates in there. And speaking of that, remember, PRP shows parts that have work centers assigned to them. If they don't have a work center on it, it's not going to show up in PRP. So even though the Pick and Fab screen doesn't use control panel, you should still assign a work center to this operation if it's the only op on a part. And again, it's a multi-use screen. We have customers who use this as the first op to pick all the components for a job, or sometimes even on the last operation in a routing if you're sending a kit to your customer. That means you can kit and build, and you can use Pick and Fab to make that kit for your customers. Jen, let's talk about one of my favorites next, which is rework. There are a lot of ways to process rework, and believe me, we've seen them all. For example, when I started as a customer with Plex back in 2008, My company wanted a rework operation created for every single normal operation on our parts except the first op. If our process routing had 5 steps, then we had 4 rework operations for every part. We were a stamping house, so there wasn't an opportunity to restamp. Other companies just have a single operation, and they use what Jen will show you in a bit, the operation description, to convey the actual rework instructions to the floor. Whichever one you choose is fine with me, one operation or many, and typically your quality department is the one who tells you what they want to do. Whatever works for you is what you should do. But one warning I want to give everybody about rework operations. If you are a standard costing facility, which most folks are, and you have an expensive part, I want you to think before you put all the rework operations at the end of the part. That used to be the standard way at Plex. But if you are making a complex machine, maybe with 5 assembly steps and a lot of BOM items at each step, let's talk this through in an example. So we've got our complex machine, ops 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, and let's just pretend for sake of discussion that every operation adds $1,000 of value to the part. So operation 10 standard cost is $1,000, 20 standard cost is $2,000. I think you get the picture. Now you add rework to your routing and you put it there as your last operation, number 60, so that it doesn't get costed, which is good. Nobody wants rework to be standard, not the costing part of it anyway. Now, let's say that you have been working on this machine and you've built it through operation 20. Inventory shows a value of $2,000, and then, you find out that your part needs rework. So you make your container defective, you sign the rework job with the operation called rework, which you have to the end of the routing. While the part is being worked, it goes up to a standard cost of $5,000. Remember, we're adding $1,000 at each step in the part, because the inventory valuation report and SCAR both say, well, this part is at the final operation, so use the last good cost at op 50 or $5,000. And when it gets done with the rework and goes back to operation 20, the value goes back down to 2,000. And both of those transactions are picked up by SCAR and visible in the inventory valuation report. That causes a little bit of balance sheet drama, and we've gotten multiple calls from customers that say, why is my part going from 2,000 to 5,000 back to 2,000? It just creates a lot of noise in your system that makes real issues harder to see. So to avoid these problems, give some thought to placement within the routing. Maybe you have operation 10, operation 20, then maybe operation 21, which is rework for op 20. So keep those close in cost within your routing if you have an expensive or complex part. As a general rule, always consult accounting before you make routing changes. Remember, in Plex, everything rolls down to accounting, so you might as well let them know in advance what's going to happen. They're going to find out anyway. All right, let's talk about the tools flag. This is the flag that we use to tell Plex that a tool is required for an operation. This is most commonly used in die shops or stamping facilities where you have to associate the correct tooling with a part to know that you're getting the correct part out. This flag is what tells the tooling system to allow you to associate a tool to an operation, and it can enforce loading of the tool at control panel. And tools loaded at control panel is how Plex manages tool life tracking, by loading it to the control panel and tracking strokes. So that's why this is such an important flag if you use tooling. Back to you, Jen.
Thank you. We're going to move on to part operation types now. Part operation types are defined by setup tables. They are assigned to the process routing of each part, and they are linked to your operation. They will define how your part will be processed. Rework. These are processed and linked to your rework operation and your operation types. Do not check the standard flag if you do not want to see this operation on your part cost structure. If you do check it, be aware that it's going to show in your cost structure with those added costs. It's recommended that at least one part op type is flagged for rework, and you must also have a rework op set up if you are using the rejection system in Plex. And don't forget what Patty just said a few minutes ago about rework and the costing. Standard. You must define part operation types as standard to do the following. Include an MRP, load source parts on the control panel. If you are using cell or multi-out processing, and if you want the operation cost to be part of your part cost structure. Include an MRP. You will want to use this if you want to show demand in MRP. This flag is recommended to be enabled. If the part is an optional part, then you probably should not enable this flag. Otherwise, demand will show an MRP that you may not need. Include an MRP inventory. Use this flag if you want to see the inventory quantity of this part op in MRP. For these two, you also have the option of setting these on PO types. Be careful with that, as it may cause double dipping on your demand. I'm going to pass this back to Patty. She's going to discuss the cell part op type and how that's going to work with your production.
Thanks, Jen. Cell operations are really kind of unusual operations. The most effective place that I've seen this used in is in a long line of circuit board manufacturing. So imagine if you have 10 people sitting in a row and a part goes on, gets added to your circuit board at every station. And maybe every station only takes a couple minutes to produce. We can set up our part to have 10 unique operations and associate the bill of material with each operation, but not have to record it until the last op, where Plex does a back flushing activity. And I hate the term back flush when talking about Plex, because Plex really is a very real-time activity, but sometimes, as you all know, the transactions can take longer than the value received from those transactions. So if you're okay with not knowing exactly how long each operation took, it's okay to set them up at cell operations and trust your operator to report it at the end. I'll bet what's going through your mind right now is, well, gosh, Patty, why don't we just have this be a one-step operation and have one bill of material associated with it? Who cares if it's at 10 different steps? The reason you might care is, so I picked circuit boards for a reason, because they're typically very high value. Let's say that we break a board at operation 4. If we only have one operation in our routing, operation 10, and we scrap the board when it's only been through operation 4, we would be scrapping a fully valued part. So with cell operations, we can report all 10 ops at one time, and we can report scrap at cell op number 4 using cell scrap functionality, and we would only scrap the value of the components through operation 4 and the labor and overhead for operations 4. So be very careful with cell operations. If you'd like to learn more about those, let us know. Back to you, Jen.
Thank you. We're going to move on to process routings at this point. So now that we've gone over the 3 sources to create a process routing for your part, we can now discuss some flags on your actual routing setup. Delay before and delay after. These are big ones. These 2 flags actually do what they are intended to do. They will stop the process for the allotted time period you assign to it. This is used, for example, when a product needs time to cool down. You can place the before flag on the next operation or the after flag on the current operation, depending on what your needs are. There is more setup to this functionality than just this flag. So if you are interested in this process, please reach out to us for further instructions on how to set this up. Interplant transfer allow. This is used just as the operation flag of interplant transfer, except at the part level. So instead of every part for the operation being allowed for interplant transfers, you can be part specific with this flag. Location. This will default the location at this step. We do not recommend this flag as it can cause some inventory placement issues if the user is not aware of the defaulted location. Plex will assign it automatically even though it can physically be placed into a different location. Approved container types. This is a tab in the action bar of your process routing screen that will allow you to assign container types to this specific part routing. This will force your user to choose only those containers that are assigned instead of choosing from your entire container listing. We feel best practice would be to default this at the part level instead. And this feature will actually be covered more in depth during our next presentation on October 14th, which will be about the different packaging configurations in Plex. I have one more feature for your routing setup is that you can enter job instructions or notes in the operation description field, and this will show on the control panel screen. This is part specific and can be viewed without having to open an attachment. This also refers back to what Patty was talking about when she was talking about rework and being able to communicate with the rework instructions. I have a screenshot actually of what the control panel would look like showing your part op description. And you can see here that it's easily viewable for your operators instead of having them open an attachment. So that concludes the presentation. Since we covered these sources at a high level today, if there are any that you would like a deeper dive into, please contact us and we can dig into them with you. We can now take some questions, and I have Patty here to help with us also.
Thanks, Jen. Hey, everybody, don't forget to unmute yourselves before you ask questions. And remember, we'll do our best to help out, but sometimes we actually need to see your configuration before we can provide the right answers. So let's open it up.
Hey, good morning. My name is Tyler Johnson. I missed the first portion of the presentation. Is this slideshow available for distribution at all?
Absolutely, Tyler. We have a YouTube channel where we publish this and all of our videos. I think there's about 20 of them out there already. So Tyler, if you don't mind, why don't you email Jen or me? Her email's up on the screen right now. We'll reply, and all of us have the link to our YouTube channel in our email signature. So if you email either one of us, you'll be able to see all of our material.
Perfect. Appreciate it very much.
You bet. Any other questions?
Yeah, hi, Patty. My name is Ryan Payne. I have actually 3 questions when it comes to Plex and operations, if you don't mind.
Go for it, Ryan.
One has to do with one of the points you mentioned about how everything flows to accounting. Is it possible to have inventory valuation of produced parts be taken almost as a snapshot of costs to avoid actual changes to rates and routings driving cost variances?
So that's a pretty loaded question, Ryan. So the inventory valuation screen can be run with different cost models and different times and different inventory levels. So if you make a change to a rate, you can always run it against a cost model at a different date. Where that gets dicey is when you add or delete operations. You can also freeze a cost model, but again, adding or deleting operations does get a little dicey. I presume you're in a standard cost environment?
I believe so, yeah. And it's less the model changing, but more like if you just say you're accounting for one operation to produce at 200 pieces an hour, actual rate's 100 pieces an hour, and you make that change in Plex, all of a sudden your inventory value changes based on that rate driving the cost of the part?
So the cost of the part will only change when someone in accounting clicks the recalc button. And we have noticed on some optimization jobs that some folks have their primary cost model recalcing daily, which would cause that to be automated. In general, that's not something that we suggest folks do. We suggest that you thoughtfully recalc rather than doing it daily. I'd love to have further discussions with you, Ryan, if you want to email me, Patty, P-A-T-T-I at control.m.solutions, because you may have some additional things going on there that we'll want to dig into.
Okay, thank you. And then these two are a little more simple because they don't have anything to do with accounting. When you're in the cost structure, I've noticed that if you have a new part or you've made a change, those aren't recalculated automatically. And I believe I've heard that there's a way to set up your system so those cost structures are recalced daily to capture any rate changes, price changes for outside services, things like that. Is that a possibility in Plex?
It is, and that's a little bit about what I was inferring a few minutes ago. What we typically recommend to our customers is this: have a cost model that does not recreate daily as your primary model that you're going to use to generate and post SCAR. Then create a new model called my daily recalc model. And on that, in the cost model, there are flags that say how often you want to recalculate, whether it's daily or monthly. We do not suggest that you do a daily recalc on your primary cost model, but it's important to know that you can have as many cost models as you want. Just like the forecasting system, you can have 10, 20, 30 cost models if you want. You can freeze them and keep them. We have clients who have a daily recalc cost model that they use for quoting, but then they keep something a little bit more structured and reliable for their closing their books.
Okay, understood. And lastly, and first off, thank you for allowing me this. Is it possible to change a standard job quantity at the top level and have that drive down through subcomponents? For instance, if you have an assembly that's composed of 10 separate parts of varying quantities per, and you change from a standard job quantity of 5 to 10, you then currently, at least as we see it, you have to go through every subcomponent and change every one of those standard job quantities accordingly. Is there any way to blow that change through from the top level?
I am not aware of one. I'll hand it off to Jen in just a second, but in UX, there are some mass update options that are pretty powerful. There's also, it's available in Classic. It's either called Part Mass Update or Mass Part Update. I've seen it called both. I would check that screen. Otherwise, I'm not aware of it. Jen, have you ever seen that?
No.
Ryan, if you email me, I'll put the question out to my team and see if anyone else knows, but I'm going to guess probably not.
Okay, that'd be great. I'll send that to you.
Cool.
Thank you both. I appreciate it.
Welcome. Anyone else got any more questions?
I don't have a question. I just want to say hi to Jen. It's been a while since I've heard your voice. Glad to hear from you.
Hi, Russ.
All right, Jen, let's talk about next week, shall we? Or the next presentation, shall we? So first off, Jen, thanks so much for that deep dive. Hopefully everyone's mind right now is going wild, thinking about creative ways to use these options to make your business run smoother. Our next scheduled presentation is going to be on packaging when Justina Walker, who's our newest team member in our brand new Canadian office, is going to go through some of the most commonly used Plex packaging options, including whether or not you want to include packaging as BOM items for costing, digging deeper into that pack container to boxes screen, and also going through the approved container options and container tracking. So if you have expensive or complex packaging or customers who require very specific packaging, you'll learn a lot in this session. I want to thank Jen for this great presentation and thank all of you for attending. And remember that we do post these to our YouTube channel within a day or so of them being done. So if you can't make a session or if you want to share one, they're all out there. So please go out and take a peek. The link to our channel can be found in any of our email signatures. And even if you have attended, we'd love it if you take a minute or two to go out there and like our videos. Those thumbs up mean a lot to us. So even if you watched it live, we appreciate the props. Thanks again, everybody. We'll see you in a few weeks. And until then, stay safe and happy plexing.
Thank you.
Okay.
Goodbye,
Have a
everyone.
good one. Bye.